Yes, welcome back to the Magic Sponge podcast, a miracle cure for all your rugby league injury issues. I'm Brian Sini. Most of you know me as the guy behind the NRL Physio social media pages. James, my co-host, he's a physio, big footy fan, big Broncos fan. Had a win this weekend again. Finns lost again. James, you're obviously riding high, a lot higher than me.
Yep. Normal proceedings resumed again for us, Brian, is in the Broncos camp. Tell you what, there's a lot of chat about Penrith are going back to back to back. If we had a 9, we're in that conversation, but I just can't quite bring myself to get there, even though they had a very, very good win over a Cowboys team that's half decent. They're not a bad team, and we were missing, a 7. They played pretty well, the Broncos. They were pretty strong, but I just wonder about that pointy end of the season. If we don't have a 9 that's just killing it and it's a worldie, I don't
The
think we're
under
going to get to the
12
promised land,
strategy of the
sadly, as much
coach's
as I'd love to
son
believe
being
it. What do you
thrown into
reckon?
the starting lineup, mate. It's tried and tested, so, just keep it going all the way up to the NRL, I reckon.
Yeah, that's right. Well, nepotism's been shown to work well across a lot of
Now,
big
mate,
industry over many
before we
years,
get
Brian.
into
So
the
just
show,
keep that going,
I
hey?
need your advice, and I need the listeners. We've got a bit of a bit of a murder mystery going on here. So I had a big event yesterday for work, 30th anniversary for our workplace, which is pretty cool. So had a big night. Rolled in. Now, this story isn't going the way that you think it's going, but we'll get into it anyway. So rolled in about 2:30 in the morning, jumped into bed, no worries, fell asleep. About 4 a.m, wake bolt upright to my wife, pretty much like punching me in the back, being like, what? And she's like, what the hell are you doing? Like, what the hell are you doing? And I was like, what are you talking about? And anyway, I kind of come to because I've had a big night. And my phone, which is sitting beside my bed, I kid you not, at full volume, is playing Yvonne Sampson and Cooper Cronk, like running down post-match a game, like just talking it through. I look over my phone, it's completely black, so there's no apps open, nothing. I can't physically remember waking up. I don't think I was that inebriated or anything like that where I could have like woken up and like opened something on my phone. So I open up my phone, there's no apps open, nothing. There's just Cooper Cronk and Yvonne Sampson just blasting out of my phone. Now, I can't figure out how that's possible. I literally had to turn off my phone and turn it back on again. Not that I wanted to, because of course listening to Cooper and Yvonne anytime talk about footy, even if it's 4 o'clock in the morning, fantastic. But James, do you have any ideas for me, or like hopefully the listeners do, because I'm struggling, mate.
No, I don't have any good ideas. I'm a little bit disappointed that your wife Rebecca was a bit upset about that. I thought she'd be like more than impressed that you're listening to some good content at 4 a.m. and just waking up the whole house after coming home a little bit worse than sober. But there's a few things in my head. So maybe your cookies have got you. Maybe there's something in a deep dive that you've mentioned in your sleep. So whether you're fantasizing about Yvonne Sampson, or most likely Cooper Cronk, which, that's fine. Everyone's got their own kinks, Brian. We're not going to judge here. We'd never judge on the Magic Sponge if you've got some kinks there. So who knows? It might have been something you just shouted out in the dead of night, all those deep, dark secrets that you're keeping to yourself about your crushes that you had on either Yvonne or Cooper. Both understandable, and both I completely am on board with as well, because I'll go hand on heart and say there's been nights that I've fantasized about both of those individuals, respectively, especially doing pre and post game analysis.
Oh, mate, and that's the thing. What more could you want at 4 o'clock in the morning than Cooper and Vonnie just talking footy? It doesn't get
Yeah.
any better. But yeah, I just found that funny, and I'm like, I have to throw that out there. If anybody's got any ideas, if that's a sign that someone's like hacked into my phone, if there's someone out there who knows that, like, I don't know, I just don't. It was the weirdest thing ever. But anyway, we'll go away from my bedtime stories. Let's talk about the best rugby league fantasy competition, James. Bundy, the NRL, and the NRLW are back with the world's first mixed gender fantasy league. I know many of you listening consider yourselves high-level fantasy players, and this is really going to test your skill with the stars of the women's game able to be selected for the first time alongside the men. It's a really great way to elevate the women's game. As we all know, fantasy sports drives a significant amount of interest in rugby league, and with the rapid growth of the NRLW, this is the perfect combo. Now, James, I know you consider yourself a gun fantasy player. I consider myself an even better fantasy player than you, and we're both big fans of the women's game. So everyone listening, head on over. It's still going, mixer.nrl.com to take us on. enter the special league code for the Magic Sponge listeners, which is FUHV1MWR, or head to the link in the podcast description. James, it's really heating up. We're about just under halfway through the mixer so far, and we're both doing pretty well. It's so good to
It
have
is
you back.
good. I think you're making a bit of a run from far down the ladder at the moment, or far down the standings there, Brian. So that's good to see. I'm sticking strong with Shania Power in my second row forward with rum and coke on her wrist. I'm really enjoying that. She didn't score amazingly this week, but I feel like my team has a much better vibe with her in my second row forward position. So I'm going to stick with Shania Power until proven otherwise, because I think she's good for the vibe of my team.
Mate, the vibes, I'm all about the vibes in the mixer. It's so good. But look, guys, as always, this is your one-stop shop for all things injury analysis in the NRL. You know why you're here. We talk about the injuries. We talk about how they affect recovery times, return to performance, and, of course, most importantly, Supercoach and fantasy scoring. If you find yourself liking this content, it's the tip of the iceberg. Head to patreon.com/NRLphysio and you'll get all the best stuff you can find. But otherwise, guys, let's get stuck in to the injury wrap from round 23.
I don't know exactly what he's done. I would have thought it was an ankle, but I'm just guessing.
He shouldn't be out for a long period of time. I mean, I'm no doctor. We have to wait for the scans, obviously, but that'd be more positive than...
The two injuries we're going to start with, Brian, from round 23, we're in the Roosters vs Eagles game. So Matt Lodge looks like an ACL injury that he sustained there. And then also an update on friend of the show, Tommy Trbojevic. So there's a little line here about a possible return date from his pec injury there. So a couple of big injuries to start things off.
Yeah, mate, Matty Lodge, I think this is probably, like, obviously there'll be people from the Seagulls, fans from the Seagulls, and, fans of Lodge who want to sort of, know about this. But I think this is also a really interesting one for anybody who has listened to us talk about Sammy Walker over the last, what feels like 2-3 months. So Matt Lodge, at the moment, it's a suspected ACL injury, and by what Manly was saying sort of post-game, they suspected a rupture and possibly, reconstruction surgery. Yeah, like obviously a significant injury. I'll be honest, and I'm sure you probably did see that little video that I put up. Like, it wasn't a super obvious mechanism. Like, I wouldn't look at it and say, definitely an ACL. There wasn't a significant, change of direction motion, jumping, landing, knee collapsing in, that kind of thing. Now, why this is relevant to the Sam Walker chat is that Matt Lodge had a partial ACL injury in that knee in 2020. So, look, I think this is the thing with partial ACL tears is that, and I speak about, up to 50% of partial ACL tears as evidence that they then progress on to complete ruptures. That doesn't have to happen in the first 6 months. It can happen in 10 years after the injury. So it's not to say that someone like a Sam Walker is definitely going to suffer an ACL injury in the next 12 months or something like that. But yeah, just an example that I just found the fact that Lodge has a past ACL injury on that knee and the injury mechanism being so innocuous. It didn't seem like it took much to sort of set that off. Just interesting for anybody sort of, following along that whole partial ACL, sprain, guys avoiding surgery and what that means for them moving forward. Now with Lodge, obviously hands-on tests are very, very accurate when it comes to ACL injuries. I will say with this, though, they thought, at the Bronx, I believe, they thought that he'd ruptured his ACL last time as well, but it just ended up being a minor partial tear that had progressed to sort of a more significant partial tear, and he avoided surgery both times. So, hopefully for Lodge's sake and for Manly's sake that there's just a bit more damage there, and they're just feeling the looseness of the past partial tear. But yeah, I'm not holding out a whole lot of hope because of the accuracy of those hands-on tests. And then just very briefly, I just see a different story about Tommy Turbo every second week. This in terms of he could be back in the second week of finals, and it's a miracle recovery because that would be 12 weeks, and they take solace in the fact that Sean O'Sullivan came back in 12 weeks and all this kind of stuff. And I mean, anybody who listens to this show, who follows me on socials, knows that the standard return to play for a pec rupture surgery is 10 to 14 weeks. So we've seen several guys come back at 10 weeks post-injury. Now, the thing with Turbo and what might hold him back to that 12 weeks more than anything is the fact that Manly applied for the salary cap dispensation, which the player has to sit out 12 weeks. So, yeah, I just find it, I mean, you've got to fill papers and fill news articles somehow, but like 12 weeks is completely standard. That's not a miracle recovery.
It's hard to see the Manly boys sneaking into the finals. Like, they are only one win outside the eights. They're on 25 points. The Bunnies are in eighth on 26. So the Knights are seventh and 27. So they're one win out of seventh effectively. But based on the way they've been travelling, they've got the Panthers this week as well. I think they'd be fairly long odds to sort of make the top eight anyway. And even if they make the eight, they've got to win a couple of games before they're probably going to see Tom back. So probably not overly realistic, I wouldn't have thought there. We'll move forward to the Titans versus the Warriors game here, Brian. Very interesting one initially was Chance Clockstar with that concussion and Mo Fodawaker getting sent off as part of that as well. And then AJ Brimson with an oblique tear as well. I think that was sort of confirmed. Was it leading into the game as well, that oblique tear that AJ Brimson was potentially carrying in?
Yeah, so they kind of spoke about him having an oblique injury. I think it was after the game last week. And then as we spoke about, like, I wasn't surprised to see them kind of be like, well, our season's on a knife edge. Even though it's a really painful injury, let's needle it up and get him out there. So he was named. He was, needled up and went to play, effectively got out in the warm-up, to try and play and just couldn't overcome the the pain. Effectively, the coach sort of indicated that the needle didn't really do much. There's a fair bit of fluid on his hip, those kind of things. So yeah, there's been a bit of speculation as to how long Brimson could now sit out for. I mean, that's another loss for the Titans, which puts them again further out of touch from that 8, and it's like, well, is it really worth getting Brimson to push through it if we're not going to make finals? It's one of those things, there's no reason, unless he's made it overly worse, there's no reason he couldn't try and do again this week what he did last week, in that, I think we spoke about it last week, where there's not major long-term repercussions for these guys trying to push through those small oblique tears, rib injuries, anything around there, apart from pain. So, yeah, I think it more comes down to where they are. Like, they could absolutely just shut him down for the season and be like, well, we're not going to make finals. Let's just not put him through that over the next 5 or 6 weeks. But, yeah, it'll come down, I think, more to a coaching decision than it will a health decision, because I've got no doubt that if the Titans were in 8th or 7th and they were, right on the edge, I reckon Brimson would be doing what he did this week every week to kind of try and get over it. And then Chance Clockstar with a concussion. I just think this is a bit of a bigger story than has been made out to be. Now, look, every concussion's different. We say that all the time, and that's absolutely true. But 3 concussions in a season now is significant. And, I think there's a lot of, I have a lot of Supercoach followers and fantasy followers, but also I follow a lot of, those Supercoach fantasy people across, whether it be Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, all of those kind of things. And I don't think there's enough people out there realising that they might have to trade out CNK, because there's a real chance that he's facing multiple weeks on the sidelines here. Now, obviously, like we've said, every concussion's different, but just for comparison, I went back and had a look at the 3 most recent guys who had 3 concussions in one season. Kalen Ponga, after his 3rd concussion, that was his season over. Keegan Hipgrave, after his 3rd concussion, that was his season over. Wade Graham, after his 3rd concussion, that was the end of his regular season. And he missed about, I think it was 2 to 3 months before he, returned in the final series, I believe. So, yeah, I guess the biggest thing with those 3 guys is that they all had concussion issues in their history as well. So before those 3, they'd also had previous concussions too, which CNK probably doesn't have that major history there. So at the very least, Chance will have to go and seek further, specialist assessment. to see how he sort of pulled up after that. But it's not all about symptoms. Like Wade Graham was symptom-free the week after his third concussion and still missed the rest of the regular season. So I guess once again, with concussions, I always say it's the unpredictability of this situation. Like, with Chance, I've only got one trade left as an example, and Chance is definitely going to be missing next week. I think at the most, unless I get really, trigger happy, I might just hold him through next week and sort of see where he's at the week after, whether the Warriors are just like, no, he's all good, pulled up fine. But yeah, I just think there's no guarantee he's back in 2 weeks at all. Like it's very, very much right, a wide spectrum in terms of when he could come back, which is quite concerning, not only for the Warriors and for Chance, and then obviously to a lesser extent. But that's why people listen here for that Supercoach fantasy side of things.
Yeah, I think if you've got the trades, I would be pulling the trigger. If it's like yourself and you've only got 1 or 2 left, you might want to hang on to it just in case you get a bigger issue with someone who's worth more money, for an example. So you might be able to go sideways a little bit more effectively. But I tend to think if I was someone that had the trades up my sleeve, Brian, I would be looking to pull the trigger. I can't think of anyone else that's had 3 concussions in a season. I think we're talking off air about, maybe was there a Luke Keary sort of time frame, or a Boyd Cordner or a Jake Friend were probably 3 that sprung to mind, but I can't recall them having 3 in a season that led to them getting shut down. So I think this situation's really, really good to shed some light on, because if you're a fantasy enthusiast, then this will give you a bit more clarity about what you might need to do or what you should probably do moving forward. So yeah, good discussion points there to touch on. So Panthers vs Storm was the next one on the slate there, Brian. George Jennings, MCL injury. Brian To'o, Liam Martin both had shoulder concerns. And then pre-game, Xavier Coates and Jerome Hughes were both ruled out. Xavier Coates with a hip issue, and Jerome Hughes sounded like either ankle or illness pre-game. There was a little bit of mixed reporting about that one that I could sort of see there. So if you to get through there, Brian, I'll let you start with probably George Jennings, if you like. You want to go straight to the medial injury that he had in his knee?
Yeah, I think the main thing with Jennings is just, super unlucky. Like, he's come in because Xavier Coates wasn't able to front up, and Jennings is coming off. He had the ACL injury last year. Then he needed to have a meniscus cleanup, I believe, as well, earlier this season. Then he had an illness that kept him out for like 4 or 5 weeks. And now, he's come back in the NRL and suffered a really unlucky MCL injury. Like the way his legs sort of got trapped underneath. Yeah, just I really feel for him. So, unfortunately, the Storm have sort of indicated they think it's 6 to 8 weeks, which, once again, hands-on tests. They'll be testing the integrity of that MCL and how loose that knee is. So, obviously, there's a fair bit of looseness there because, if they're saying 6 to 8 weeks, you're looking at moderate to high-grade injury. The one, silver lining he can take from it is it's not to his ACL reconstructed knee, it is to the other knee. So, you're not building, deficiencies on top of deficiencies in terms of an MCL rupture potentially on top of a previous ACL rupture. But yeah, just horrible to see for him. Just quickly wanted to mention Brian To'o and Liam Martin. They played out the games, but both seem to be struggling with shoulders at different points. So whether they're stinger burners, minor AC joint injuries, just something to keep an eye on sort of moving forward. If I trade out CNK, it'd be to Brian To'o, even with a shoulder injury the way he's going at this point in time. So it's not really a massive concern. Xavier Coates with a hip, it sounded like a hip pointer, but they weren't super specific. But it doesn't sound like anything that'll keep him out for longer than, say, 2 to 3 weeks. And then, exactly right with Jerome Hughes. I think it started off as an illness. Like, they were like, oh, yeah, he's seeing the doc, he's feeling pretty rough, and that was pretty much it. But then it came out sort of pre-game, their release on their website said ankle, and then post-game Bellamy actually sounded a bit concerned. Now, in saying that, coach speak, ducks and drakes, all that kind of stuff, you never know. It might not be that big a deal. Apparently, he suffered the injury about 20 to 30 minutes into round 22, so not the week just gone, the week before, played out the game, but then it's just gotten really angry, after it settled down and stuff like that. So whether there's a, lateral ankle sprain or a high ankle sprain there that's just kind of aggravated moving forward. But yeah, it does sound like there's a bit of concern there. I've had a few people sort of message me and say, no, like, it's just Bellamy playing silly buggers. And Jerome, I think Billy Slater said in the post game, who's somebody who is very in with the Storm, said, Jerome could have played at a push today, but we just decided to give him the time off. So yeah, I think reading in between the lines, it's sounding like he's going to be okay, but I don't have
It's
a lot
always
of
an interesting one for
certainty of
Supercoach,
that at the
Brian. I
moment,
think he scored
unfortunately.
9 tries in his last 6 games, which isn't overly common for him. He's not sort of a notable prolific try scorer. He's sort of bigger in sort of base and power, isn't he? But yeah, he's on an absolute tear from a try scoring point of view. I guess if you think he can keep that up, then I'd go in and get him. If not, I think he probably got better options with like who we touched on last week with like a Dom Young or a Dane Gagai. I think they've probably got a more sound floor that aren't as necessarily reliant on the tries to get up there into those like bigger, better scores. But yeah, he's been scoring plenty of tries recently for the Panthers, and they're red hot, the Panthers, aren't they? So I wouldn't argue against it. It just depends if you think he can keep up the streak in terms of the tries scored there. Cowboys versus Broncos was that next game that we're going to talk about. So Jesse Arthurs was concussion and then some minor injuries here by the sound of things, Brian. So we've got Herbie Farnworth with a leg cork and facial laceration. Then Adam Reynolds and Kobe Hetherington were ruled out pre-game just before kickoff, weren't they?
Yeah, so I think probably like Reynolds is the big one to talk about. The cork back for Kobe Hetherington shouldn't be anything major. Even with Reynolds, like groin tightness, not that big a deal. I think just because he's their main kicker and their goal kicker, he's had groin issues in the past. So it's something that he's played through at different times, so he'd know pretty well. But just worth mentioning with that kicking, that obviously can limit them a little bit more and make those symptoms hang around, for longer. Now, they've got the bye coming up, so, do they just give him round 24 off, then 25, and then back for round 26? That'd be interesting. I think especially winning a game against the Cows, that could have been potentially a toss-up game for them. Like if I was the Bronx and what I've sort of been hearing with it, I think that'd be an excellent option to sort of give him 24 off, then have 25 and then fit and firing for the finals. But we'll see how that goes. And then Herbie Farnworth, it was just a leg cork. I've got some images that popped up on the Broncos Instagram page after the game. He's just got an ice pack sort of down on that lower leg. Very unlikely to be a fracture. So I would say more than likely just copped a cork. And then he had a pretty nasty, if you've got a strong stomach, head over to his Instagram, because he had a pretty nasty facial laceration just above his eye.
Yeah, good call. I think so. The Broncos have the Eels next Friday night, so that'll be Para coming off a 5-day turnaround. So they're probably in a better position overall to get the win there, even minus Adam Reynolds. I think like Jack Cogger went all right there the other night. I think the Broncos were pretty good all around the park, weren't they? The Cowboys certainly put in, but they sort of were pretty comprehensively outplayed, in my opinion. So it'd be interesting to see what they do in the lead up to that bye coming up in round 25. Hey, Brian. So that'll be one to definitely keep an eye on. But it wouldn't surprise me if they take him through there. They're sitting pretty on the same amount of points as the Panthers. They're on for and against in second. So I don't know. I don't know if they need to keep foot on the pedal there to get into the top 2. I don't necessarily think they do. If you look at the Warriors, they're 3 wins behind because the Broncos still have a bye up their sleeves. So they probably do have one they could take off there potentially. But whether they want to do that in round sort of, 24 upcoming, or whether they do that sort of 26, 27, it's hard to sort of know. I guess it depends on the health of the rest of the squad. We'll go to the Dolphins game next. So unlucky for the Finns there, Brian. They only just got squeaked out by a couple of points there after a pretty big night's comeback, actually. The Dolphins were well on top in that game with an Osako triple to kick things off. Injuries from this: Bradman Best with groin tightness, and then Jacob Saifidi with a hamstring concern. It looks like a low-grade hamstring injury, that one, I think.
Yeah, so low grade, but still probably 2 to 4 week return to play. And then Bradman Best, pretty much what I said with Reynolds, minus the kicking. So groin tightness, not really a massive worry, but he won't have the kicking to sort of suggest that it'll hang around for too long. So I think the Saifidi should be fine to go before the finals, and Bradman Best should be good.
Bunnies versus Sharks was the next one, Brian. So Jai Arrow with back spasms. That looks like it's probably just a week-to-week prospect, depending on how that settles. And then Ronaldo Militalo was the interesting one we touched on last week, where he was ruled out with a what was it? Was it a knock that they said in the training there, or a jaw injury? There was something fairly nondescript there, but it ended up turning out that he missed last week and this week. So maybe a bit more news in regards to Ronaldo Militalo as well.
Mate, I don't want to feed you conspiracies. I hate to do it. But I had two people message me this week saying James was right on the podcast. I know some in and around the Sharks.
The
and
tin
Militalo
foil
suffered
helps
a
my
concussion,
cognitive
and I'm
abilities,
like,
Brian.
well,
I'm telling
there
you,
he
mate.
is.
Like, if you're into conspiracy, it helps. It helps. Higher intelligence. Higher intelligence.
It makes sense if if he's missed this week as well, potentially. So, yeah, look, we're not saying for sure. That once again is two people who could come from anywhere on the internet. Could just be fellow tinfoil hatters like yourself. But, yeah, so we haven't heard anything more on Mulatalo as yet, but that sounds like it's just going to be an interesting one with a bit of uncertainty around what's actually going on. Gyro with the back spasms, I think this is probably the most interesting one from the weekend for your casual fan, in that it looked horrible, right? Like so many people, the number of tweets I've been tagged in the last 24 hours diagnosing Gyaro with like a herniated, slipped, blown apart disc that's going to need surgery, and he's going to be out for 12 months and like all this stuff. And I think it's what we spoke about.
That's right.
We
Yeah.
speak
Yeah.
Reed Marnie the other week, just about like disc bulges and those kind of things. And they're not all the death sentence. And there will be people listening, and I will see probably 5 or 6 of them tomorrow who come in with really, really nasty cases of acute lower back pain. Like really, really horrible, super debilitating, 9 to 10 out of 10 pain on the pain scale. Just horrible, horrible stuff. But the thing is the majority of those will not be involved with, disc herniations, surgery, injections, long recovery periods, all that kind of stuff. And that's whether you're an everyday person or you're a professional athlete. And that's not to, downplay what some people out there listening will have experienced with, issues in their backs. I have some patients on my list who are dealing with back pain 12 weeks after it started, so, and even longer, and people who have herniations and need surgery and stuff like that. But it is the minority is in those cases, and particularly with Arrow, it wasn't a major mechanism of injury. He just kind of got twisted as he was making a tackle. The Souths don't seem really concerned at all. I think that was probably the big thing for me, is I probably wasn't, and you can go with coach speak again here. But if they kind of came out and said, oh, look, he's gone straight to hospital, he's getting ranked neurological problems, numbness, can't feel his legs, like lost control, coordination, all that kind of stuff. If that was the case, then I would be on here having a totally different discussion with you, James. I'd be like, this could be something really, really serious. I'm quite concerned. But like you see it, and as I said, whether it be in professional athletes or, everyday people, you can have 9 out of 10 back pain, like 10 out of 10 back pain be absolutely horrible, but pull up relatively quickly. Now, that's not to say that he'll definitely play next week. Like it can be stiff enough and sore enough that he could miss 2 weeks, 3 weeks, but it's very unlikely to cost him like, ages and ages. If it does, then he was in the minority for sure. Especially as somebody who works in hospital and deals with this kind of stuff all the time.
Yeah,
I'm
you
sure
do see it a
you
lot,
have
especially if
similar
you're dealing
insight.
with like that ED cohort, the people that present through emergency with acute back pain. A lot of times atraumatic as well. So sometimes very low mechanism, sometimes people just wake up with pain with no underlying sort of cause for it. Obviously distressing because your pain levels are very, very high. But I guess the really difficult thing when you're going to ED, they're trying to rule out, is there significant neurological pathology? Is it broken, or is it a cancer, or is it infection? And if you rule out most of those nasty ones, then unfortunately they sort of say, well, it's pain relief, keep it moving, keep walking, keep doing what you can, and let the natural history progress to what it was, which I think for a lot of people is sometimes difficult to hear, or disappointing to hear that there's not really a fix for it. It's sort of just this isn't a sinister thing that we need to intervene on and we need to keep you in here for. It's just a case of you've just got to see how it goes. That's where ED is really hard with back pain, mate, because it's not going to be a very useful thing for 99.9% of the population unless you've got any of those, yeah, like you said, those very, very, very rare underlying sinister things. And the most common ones that we would see in that setting would be, fracture is your most common one, and they're probably way more common in the elderly, really significant osteoporosis from a high mechanism type injury, fall, motor vehicle accidents, those sort of things. So they're the more common ones, but then your cancers and your infective sources are super rare. They're just not very common. And again, they sort of have a bit more of a history behind them that makes sense that way. So yeah, it's tricky. It's tricky, but I think, like you said, to your point, with Jairo, he's probably not going to be a huge amount of time or, something that's going to be a season ender for him by any stretch of the means. Hey, I think he's going to be in and around it.
It just leaves him susceptible to aggravation over the next, 4 to 6 weeks. So, potentially he comes back in 2 weeks, but he could get bent the wrong way and flare it up again. That's probably the biggest thing is you wouldn't expect to see him out for several weeks, but then you'd just be wary about, if he gets bent
just
the wrong
on Jairo
way.
here, Brian, I've just got an interesting little side note to make. This isn't a conspiracy, by the way, I'll caveat with that, but the Bunnies have done quite a lot of travel of late. So they obviously had the Perth game. They did have the Broncos on the sunny coast. And they also did Tamworth last week to the Tigers. So they went sunny coast, Tamworth, Perth. So that's quite a decent amount of travel. Especially they're a Sydney-based team as well. So they're probably going to have less travel than some of the other teams that live, regionally as well. So I just think that's an interesting sort of side note there that, maybe the travel factor there is a bit more of a contributor to even just exacerbations of back pain as well. You sometimes see it with people, don't you? Long haul flights, more travel here, more travel there. Just those prolonged static positions can be just problematic from a back point of view. So I wonder if that's sort of part of the picture there for Jairo, maybe with the extensive travel, perhaps. I don't know, just something I thought was interesting when I was looking at what the Bunnies have done recently. Hey.
Yeah, well, I think they've got a couple of trips ahead too. Even Demetrio said in the post match, the flight home from Perth is going to be a bit of a
they're Cairns next week. Yeah,
and then
you're
I
right.
think they've got to go to Cairns.
So they're Cairns.
Yeah, So I think that, yeah.
And then Newcastle. So they don't have a home Sydney-based game till round 20. Oh, they're by round 26, aren't they? So it would be.
Yeah. So it's one of those things, But once again, they're on the precipice, mate. They need to win games. So and they've got Tavita Totola, who for anybody interested, and this is patrons as well, because I kind of was trying to find out more on him. I got told a neck injury, but I have found out today that Totola is out for at least another couple of weeks with a minor knee procedure. So had a minor knee surgery, and then Hame Sele. He's out as well with something that Souths have not said anything about.
Burgess suspended as well. He just copped 3 weeks.
So they're going to need...
Yeah.
Oh, huge. Yeah, of course. So, mate, they're going to need Arrow back as soon as humanly possible. I mean, a flight to Cairns isn't going to help back spasms, but... Yeah, they're going to be working hard on him this week.
Just a little bit extra just to the West Coast for Jairo, so that sucks.
I don't know who teed that up.
You'd want Rusty to get you in business, wouldn't you? For all intents and purposes, I think you want business. Yeah, you want business regardless, but especially in that scenario. So anyway, good luck to Jairo getting him back out there. Eels versus the Dragons. So Moses Sully ruled out pre-game with a calf injury. Then Francis Molo with concussion out of this one, Brian. They're the two we've got listed here. Any other updates in those spaces?
No, not really, mate. Just I think Sully's a minor calf, so 1 to 3 weeks usually. But apart from that,
last game of the round was Raiders v Tigers. Dane Laurie concussion. Charlie Staines had a hamstring concern, and Seb Chris did as well, Brian. Do we know much about hamstring grades there for those two guys?
Yeah, I think both supposedly minor. And both of them outside backs rely on that top-end speed pretty heavily, so I'd be surprised to see them front up again next week. So expecting kind of a 2 to 4 week for both of them. Unless
very good. That's the wrap for the injuries then, Brian. So we might head straight into the Patreon questions. So we'll go patreon.com/NRL Physio. That's what you need to get onto to get all the in-depth answers you want for injuries, for Supercoach purposes, for general chat. for your spiritual well-being, if you want to talk about Yvonne Sampson and Cooper Cronk wrapping up the footy at 4 a.m., I'm sure Brian's game if you get on Patreon there and talk to him about that stuff as well. First question comes in, Brian. So can you explain how Connolly Lemuelu was able to play this week for the Dolphins?
Mate, that was a very interesting one. Got a lot of questions on that. I will say sort of what I have been told by a few different people is effectively Lemuelu came off last week after copying a bit of a blow to the chin. Was put under initially as like let's bring him off for a HIA. The independent doctor reviewed the footage and deemed it Category 1. So they said, yep, Category 1, because Lemuelu's arms went up sort of towards the sky as he was lying on his back, which is that classic, what we call tonic posture, or looked like the classic tonic posture, where the arms go stiff or the legs can go stiff and that kind of thing. But the Dolphins put him through a HIA. They reviewed the footage themselves, and they said that the arms up in the air, I believe they said, was because they had strapped both of his shoulders, and that's why his arms went up in the air. And then they said that the HIA he passed, they believed that it wasn't a significant blow. So effectively what the Dolphins had said was they didn't believe it was a concussion, and the independent doctor believed it was a Category 1, which meant that he couldn't return. So it's similar process to the Tommy Turbo one from earlier in the season, which is then it's gone to the NRL. The Dolphins have said, well, we don't think it was a concussion, even though it was deemed Category 1. The NRL has, by all intents and purposes, signed off on that, and that's how he played this week. Look, we won't dive too much into the ins and outs of, getting ourselves in trouble about trying to diagnose people from TV screens. The one thing I will say, which we've spoken about again, James, and it just further reaffirms it, I just don't, I really struggle with the role of the independent doctor here, because I'm like, if the independent doctor is independent and has any, I know he had the power to keep Lemuelu from returning that day, and I think I completely get that, and that is definitely a powerful role to play, is that you have someone there who is like, no, I don't want this guy returning today. So yes, that role is fulfilled. But with this whole, and we've had a problem with Category 1s and Category 2s being treated differently, and all this kind of stuff, I just think if an independent doctor has, seen enough, because Category 1s, once again, are, in all other sporting leagues, clear signs of concussion, and they are diagnostic of concussion. So I'm repeating myself from whatever podcast it was with Tommy Turbo earlier in the season, and for all those Manly conspiracy theorists who said that I was just doing that because Manly was playing the Dolphins the next week, here is a Dolphins player in the same situation, and I'm just as critical. I am equally as critical of the whole situation of what is the what is the point? I just don't see. Yeah, as I said, I know they have that game day role, but I just feel like the whole independent doctor thing has been a bit oversold, because I just don't think, fobbing off sort of what they feel about signs that are said to be obvious signs of concussion, and supposedly it's only supposed to be rare. We were told, it's only very rare that something is deemed Category 1 and it isn't diagnosed as a concussion. We've had 2 already this season. 2 in a season is not, I wouldn't consider that overly
I'm
rare.
sure there was more there as well. I think
Chance
already. Earlier in the year was one as well. I'm sure Eli Katoa and Liam Martin was a bit murky as well, wasn't it? So there's a few scenarios that I'm just not super clear on, just with how the NRL's written the guidelines, with how the independent doctor fits into it compared to the team doctor. So I just, I'm a little bit perplexed as to sort of how that role goes. And I think, if you're an independent doctor and you're making that clinical decision, is there value to having that person there or not? Does it have to be NRL appointed? I don't, well, they are NRL appointed, so I don't know. I don't know how you clear that up and make it better for the seasons moving forward. Maybe you need to have more stricter governance or something to do with that when a clinical decision's made, because a good example of the category one symptoms and diagnosing concussion. One of our good mates who is a doctor, he works in emergency now, so he did confraternity shield recently for the males and females. So it was interesting. He had footage of this game with one of the females having like clear category one symptoms, but it was getting the riot act read to him by the team's manager saying, no, this girl's fine, there's nothing wrong. Literally pulled the video up and it's clear as day. She is concussed, like crystal clear. And he's like, this is a Cat 1 symptom. This is what they are. Like, there's no way this girl's going back on the field. There's just absolutely no way I'm going to do that. So he said for him, it was quite good because it's like, well, they have a general understanding of what Cat 1 symptoms are. You go to a video and anyone can tell what category 1 symptoms are. He's like, even, this manager of this team, because everyone's just like, no, she's fine. She said she's fine. And he's like, well, here's the footage of it. And they're like, oh, actually, no, she's not fine. Yeah. So he's like, it was good for me in that scenario because he's like, no way I'm going to let this person go back out on the field when that is exactly how led to her coming off the field to get assessed. Because you're like, I'm not a specialist in concussion as such. He's like, I understand the guidelines and what they're trying to achieve, but when you can go back to the video and you can sort of put the protection up for those younger sort of high school age players for Confro, which you would have played as well in your junior footy heyday there, Brian. So he said it was good for him from that point of view. But I like your points about the independent doctor as well. I completely agree. So. Any other comments on that sort of space, Brian? I think we've sort of ticked all the big ticket items there, haven't we?
Yeah, I think the only thing I would say is that I understand the argument, or not the argument, the point that is made against independent doctors performing the HIAs, in that it's beneficial for club doctors who know the players, who know their behaviours, know their personalities, all that kind of stuff, to not perform that that actual HIA assessment in the sheds where you're testing cognition and recall and balance and, all that kind of stuff. It's great to have a club doctor doing that because they are with the players week in, week out. They know their players. But something like a category 1 symptom, it's very, very rare that you'd have to know the player to be able to discern between a category 1 and category 2. Like category 1, as you said, and how I've had it described to me by many health professionals who work at the top level. So not just, regular Joes like us. They've said that the whole point of category 1 is that mums and dads sitting on the couch can be like, oh, yep, that's the checklist. That is what they've done, and that's considered concussion. So, yeah. Anyway, I don't think it's going to change anytime soon. But this is just our weekly voice. We haven't voiced our frustration at it in a while.
It's been a while. Hopefully next year there's a bit more. I hate using the word consistency around. I won't use consistency. Hopefully there's just better guidelines around that, and the clubs have all agreed to those things, and they go into the season with a clear set of expectations about what entails with an independent doctor or not independent doctor, with a team or not team, and we can all just move on and get on with it. Second question from Patreon here, Brian, is about Corey Harawira-Naera. Is there any updates on him after he has been sitting out for a few weeks now after seizures? Hey, it must be... God, it feels like 5 or 6 weeks ago now. Is that about the ballpark with him?
Oh, it's been ages. Yeah, probably
8 weeks. Yeah,
8 or 9 weeks so far. He was initially expected to just miss 4 weeks. Look, I'll say here, obviously it's a very sensitive situation. I haven't heard anything that he's on the precipice of returning. The few whispers that I've heard here and there have more been around potentially season over, those kind of things. So nothing concrete, and once again, it is a sensitive situation, so I won't go, down the rabbit hole of talking about rumours that I've heard and all that kind of stuff, but generally the vibe that I'm getting is that it's more later rather than sooner in terms of his return date.
Good stuff there, Brian. Question number 3, this is a big one. I wasn't able to make it down to Sunshine Coast Stadium this Saturday to see Ryan Papenhuyzen get 40 minutes in for the Mighty Falcons. How have you seen much about his return, and what did you make of it?
Mate, I was stinging today, obviously, with a big night last night to celebrate, but something that got me through was sitting down and watching Pappy run around. Watched the whole first half on the great QPlus.tv, which is well worth the investment. Queensland Cup, some of the best stuff you'll ever do. But, yeah, look, he looked about as good as you could hope for a guy coming back from 13 months out of the game. We know what he's been through, all that kind of stuff. He wasn't the old Pappy. Like, he wasn't, back to his barnstorming, tackle busting, top speed best. But considering how long he's had out of the game and how recently, like, if you think back even 6-7 weeks ago, he posted an update of like, I've had a really, crappy month where it's just been really frustrating. I'm almost at the same point at the end of this month that I was at the start of this month. That's like 6 weeks ago. And now he's out there, he didn't look out of place. He played really well, laid on a try. Like, to be honest with you, for me, it was more like he probably had, like, he's obviously got some ways to go to get that performance back. So that top end speed, that tackle busting, that bursting through contact, that kind of thing, but also timing stuff as well. I think, which will come with game time over the next few weeks. I still wouldn't expect him back, in the NRL next week, potentially even the week after. I'm thinking somewhere around that round 26, round 27, if he keeps building from there. But yeah, it was just, I think overall, the way I'd summarise it, it was as good as you could have hoped for. Like, I would not have expected any better than what he did, which is, that's fantastic.
I think one of the other things to consider there, Brian, is, if someone comes back from a serious injury and you just notice a dip, you really notice a big dip. I just didn't have that same vibe today. I think it was really encouraging. I was really good to see. Didn't seem obviously hampered by it, and I don't know how he pulled up, obviously, after 40 minutes of game time, but hopefully for him, he went well from that point of view. But I guess you can cast your mind back to a few people. I know we talked off air. I remember when Jarrell came back from his ankle, and you saw him trying to get across the park, and you just went, oh man, it's not really looking real good here. Even like Sean Fensom, after he had his, major leg injuries as well. Like, there's a few players you can just recall from like those big traumatic injuries that you see him on the field the next year and you think, it doesn't quite look the same, which is to be expected. But then I guess if a lot of those guys just lose a little bit, then yeah, it can really, really affect them from a week to week and year to year perspective as well. But I thought it was pretty encouraging. So yeah, good to see Ryan Papenhuyzen, and all the best for him moving forward. I think for those games, hopefully more on the Sunshine Coast that I can get along to, which wouldn't be on a Saturday, on Sunday. Sunday
I'll
games?
go to Bash Up Park.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, Bash Up Park next week. I think it's on a Saturday, so I'm hoping to take Isabel, my daughter, which will be good.
Well, I might have to call in some favours there, see if I can get there on a Saturday, because I'm a long shot as it stands. Last question from Patreon, Brian, is about any concerns about the strapping that Ruben Garrick had around his calf.
Yeah, so it more looked like actually around his shin. So he had like strapping that went around the calf, obviously, but he had almost like shin pads, like soccer shin pads, sort of around the front of his shin. So usually that's to protect probably one of two things: either like a cork, like a bad cork of the lower leg, or a laceration, a cut. These had stitched up and whatever, and needs to protect it. Look, usually either of those options not overly concerning. I wouldn't say I've watched Garrick super closely over the last 2 weeks to be like, to notice that his performance had dipped off massively with that. But I know you've got some really good Supercoach statistics for us on this as to why this week was particularly pretty, I guess can ease our concerns.
Yeah, a couple of numbers, Brian, just to back up that point that you made there. So for base and power stats, the past 4 weeks, 48, 44, 36, 28. So not really concerning there for Ruben Garrick. If you're an owner, you're not looking to get off him, I don't think. I don't have any concerns that there's been a dip in his performance despite a little bit of extra elastoplast around the calf or shin region there.
Yeah, because he knocked up and then, got 40 yesterday in base and power. So, even if you look at last week as that 28 as like a bit of a dip, which is, could be fair enough, but then, pumping out 40 this week, I think, I think Garrick, personally, I would tie his Supercoach potential more to whether Manly can be competitive and put on some attacking stats over the next few weeks, hey?
Yeah, very true. So I think they've got Panthers this week, so that's probably it's almost a sit game, isn't it, when you think about how good the Panthers are defensively. Yeah. Then they've got the Warriors, and then they've got the Bulldogs in 26, and then in 27 they've got the Tigers. So it's not sort of like two not great games. Last two are all right. Yeah. Like, the Bulldogs and the Tigers might have their end of season Bali trips already booked by then, so they might completely check out of those games. So they're probably not bad games to have in, but yeah, the two coming up are probably not red hot, are they?
No. All right, mate. Let's move on to the important stuff. We are into our Bundy mixer picks. So we've spoken a big game all season. Mate, I'm on a bit of a charge, so I want to hear how you're going. Hopefully you're sort of in a similar vein of form to me. What did you do in the mixer this week, and what are your plans for next week?
Pretty consistent for me. I sort of seem to be sitting around like the 470, 480, 490 scores. And this week was no different, Brian. So 471 for me, boosted Cleary and Polite at fullback. So my team was Cam McInnes, Taufua, Shania Power, who's my favourite, obviously. So she's never leaving my team, regardless of how she scores. Nath Cleary, Katoni Staggs in centre, and Polite at fullback there from the Titans, who's only scored, I think, 40 this week, or maybe a bit less than that. So, yeah, I left a few out there this week. I think from a hooking point of view, I think it's just got to be Cam McInnes or Damien Cook. I think even more so than Harry Grant. I think Cook and McInnes seem to just rack up those tackle numbers, which make them more attractive to have. And I think front row forward just looks like Georgia Hale is a set and forget there. She's averaging 65 or 68, I think, at front row. She's one of the few middles who plays the full 70 minutes. I think it's only her and Simon Taufa who play full games in the middle there. The Dragons lock forward there, Tuanay, Alexis Tuanay, she plays big minutes there, but she doesn't have the numbers to back that up as it stands compared to Georgia Hale and Smile Taufa. So I think front row, you just got to get one of those two in your team. They're just by far and away the best selections from the W. I was looking at second row forward options for the women, apart from Shania Power, just in case I wanted to move off there. And there's not a lot that are playing the full game. So I think there's a few knocking around there. Like the Dragon second rows are both playing. Livia Koenig, who's always been a favourite of mine, is there. Robbie Teetzel from the Broncos, Yasmin Clydesdale, Shaylee Bent are the big candidates there, who are obviously the Jillaroos reps too. So I guess you could sort of make an argument there for some of those players, but I don't know. Shania just looks better in my team, and I just love what she's about. So I'm just not going to move off there. I guess for this week, Brian, Latrell, Damien Cook, and Cleary are probably just going to be in my team. I think Georgia Hale's probably the same. Kalen Ponga on Sunday as a day game versus the Dogs is pretty appetising, but I think Cleary versus Manly on Thursday is just a bit of a no-brainer. So it might be a pretty similar sort of mix-up of my team. I might have to try and get a bit creative with who's going to be there for me in the female centre wing position or the female second row forward position, just maybe as a couple of points of difference there. How did you travel this week in the mixer, mate? Tell us all about how you're kicking along there for the Bunny Mix.
Mate, big score this week, 540. So I've gone from the worst week ever in week one, and I was ranked 400 of 420 in our league. So I've gone from 400 to 200 last week. Now I'm ranked about 100th. So I'm on a charge, mate. I'm on an absolute charge. I boosted Hale and Cleary, so really happy with that.
Two good boosts,
and pretty much more, 100%. So I think the only difference was I went McInnes, Georgia Hale, Shania Power. I'm similar. I'm loving what she's doing in my second row. Cleary, I had Isabel Kelly and then had Latrell at the back. So, look, for me, I think really similar to what you were sort of saying with it all. I think it's going to it's going to be really tough for me to go past Latrell against the Dragons. Even though Ponga is against the Dogs, he's still looking so good. Latrell, even in that game where I wouldn't have said he did a whole lot, he still scored 66, So, and then someone like Ponga, who is, fantastic. That's the other thing with Ponga. He's in the halves, isn't he? So he isn't. I was looking for him at fullback, but he's in the halves. So
he's in the halves.
I can't go Ponga over Cleary just with the kicking, the kicking meters and stuff like that. So I think that just rules Ponga out. So I think Cleary for sure, Latrell. My team will almost be exactly the same again next week. I reckon it'll be close to it, unless I can find a sneaky second row or center matchup for one of the NRLW players. I think that's what I'll spend a bit of time on this week. But yeah, it's. I think I've got a good thing going with. I feel like I've come into my groove now, and I'm on the charge going for number one. So it's good.
Yeah, I did have a little bit of a bed shit this week on the mixer side of point of view there, Brian, because I think I didn't set my team before the first NRLW game kicked off. So that was the game that Isabel Kelly scored a try, and I was like, oh no. So I was panicking because I literally got on with like maybe a minute to go. So I had to. That's why I went Polite at fullback and
Yeah,
Stags at
right.
center, because I was like, well, I can't really run any other better centers from the
Mm.
W point of view. So I was like, well, I'll go the fullback from the Titans who's been scoring really well.
Mm.
And Stags actually went pretty good for the Bronx because he
Yeah,
was
he
goal
did.
kicking
Yeah.
too. So it sort of worked out for me. But yeah, it probably was just my boost. I think I boosted Polite and she only scored, 40, I think. And
Yeah.
then, yeah, obviously Cleary scored well. But yeah, the fact she got on Georgia Hale there, she's just pumping out massive scores and massive minutes. She's a gun, genuine
Yeah,
gun.
100%. All right, mate. Now hit me, Supercoach Corner. Hit me with your score. You are the better bloke this week by a fair way.
Yeah, a few chocolates for me this week in Supercoach format. So I went Joey Manu to Dane Gagai this week, which
Oh,
doesn't look like a great trade, but I'm still not that upset about it because Gag still scored 70 without much else going his way. So that was definitely good to see. Had the captain on Ponga this week, which was also good. He had an awesome game, Kalen Ponga. Like, it was funny though. I was listening to Joey Johns. He was talking on one of the media channels, and he's like, "Oh, like the Tigers went on a tear in '05, and Parry went on a tear in '09." And he's like, "What about Newcastle this year? Are they going to go on the tear as well?" And I was like, "Oh man, that's a big, big, big call to make because I think they were pretty good today, but they were sort of under the pump there from the Finns, weren't they? Like that was a pretty close game."
yeah, 100%. Yeah, absolutely.
So I don't get Jared Hayne vibes. Just tearing it up for Para from eighth position, like I do see. But I tell you what, if Kalen Ponga does have that sort of season in him, he is a person that could rip and tear and get you there. He's that good. Like there's no doubt about that. Like he could get red hot and he could do some serious damage on his own. Like if he's fit and firing.
Yeah, and I think that's the key. Is I'd like, yeah, Joey's probably jumping in early as he is probably entitled to do, being the ninth immortal and a Newcastle legend. But I just would love to see the Knights sort of do it convincingly against someone like
Mm.
the Finns. The Finns obviously are still premiership favourites, and so a win
Heavyweights, of
over,
course.
yeah, like a win over
Mm.
them is about as good as you can get. But I don't know. Have the Knights got anyone of substance over the next 4 weeks? I've got a feeling, because that's why I wanted to get Gagai hard, is I don't think they do.
Yeah, so it goes Dogs, Rabbitohs,
Oh,
and
yeah.
that's at home. They play the Bunnies. So again, not a the Bunnies aren't like a red hot defensive team. They've got the Sharks at
Oh,
home
yeah.
again in round 26, and round 27 is against the Dragons. So no, it's not a
Yeah.
murderous row there
But
for the Knights to get through.
if they roll over the Rabbits and the Sharks, I'll
Yeah,
be on them. Like I reckon if they
the
roll over those
bandwagon's going
two,
to pick up
yeah,
steam massively if they get home there. I agree.
100%. 100%. All right.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. What did I got? 1-2-8-0. Yeah. Pretty boring for me. Like I've only got one trade left. I nearly did the exact same trade and did like Manu to Gagai, but yeah, I couldn't do it. And I think now I might have to do it via CNK anyway. Like I might go CNK to Gagai potentially and then just run the gauntlet. Because I just don't think I can start. I don't think I can start Rue McGarrick against the Panthers. I just don't, and that's outside of his thing around his calf. I just think anyone against the Panthers at the moment, like, would you back Manly to score a try? I don't know. I really, Melbourne scored 1-2 tries if that. I know they
Yeah.
weren't at full strength, but yeah, just Penrith are crazy. Like they're
Yeah,
about as much
Manly
a
looked
wild
flat
card.
this week
Mm.
against the Roosters as well. Like there was just I don't know the best way to describe it. I've just got like they looked tired in my brain, but they just didn't look like they had much pep about them. I think it's just been a year of attrition for Manly, and I think there's been a few more injuries to key positions there. I think Penrith will get over the top of them pretty quick, and it could be like a 40 points to 4 type scoreline, or like there might be a bit of garbage at the end for Manly, maybe on the points front.
Yeah.
I can't see them getting too close to Penrith. Like I'd hate to think what the line betting's going to be in the markets because I think Panthers will be well heavy favourites there.
So I think I will have Ty Munro, who I can play, and they're playing the Dragons, so he's not a bad play because I need to effectively I'll need to replace CNK and I'll need to replace Garrick in my starting CTW. So I didn't play Manu this week, which cost me some points, but so I'll have Manu coming in for one of them, and then the other one I'll just have to replace with either Mulatalo against the Titans if he is over his jaw injury or concussion or, whatever it is, or Munro. So I might be able to hold that trade at least for another. Like, my biggest thing, probably ideally in my mind, what I want to hold that trade for is the Bunnies buy, and then potentially like trade out a Cody Walker or someone like even an Alex Johnston. Trade out an Alex Johnston for like a high upside centre wing who's got a couple of good matchups in the last couple of weeks. So that's in my ideal mind, but I just have a feeling in my gut at the moment that I don't feel great about CNK. So that's a bit of a worry, but yeah, something I'm going to have to keep an eye on. But otherwise, guys, that's a wrap for this week. As always, if you like the pod, recommend it to a friend, review us. The reviews make a big difference to sort of getting us in front of new ears, which is really, really good. More and more people listening to the show every week, which is fantastic, even with sometimes not being too many major injuries, which hopefully means that people are enjoying listening to us rattle on, James. But look, mate, have another good week. Hopefully you can get the time off daddy duties on next Saturday and we can head off to Barshup Park in Norths and watch Pappy run around, eh?
Mate, it would be very, very, very good. But if I don't see you there, I'll see you on the internet next Sunday, Brian.
Love it, mate. All right, guys. Have a good week and up the mighty, mighty Redcliffe Dolphins.